Hi there, I'm going to do a review for Star Wars, The Mandalorian, and Grogu. Movie came out a few weeks ago, and I don't know, this feels different to me. Movie wasn't terribly bad. I mean, there was nothing truly amazing about it. It's been, I guess, the big redeeming quality of it is that it's been 7 years since the last major Star Wars movie hit the big screens, and so they had Disney and more or less Lucasfilm had to put something in the bottle. More or less, so we've been having Disney shows on Disney Plus for the last 6 years, and of course they had the Mandalorian come on the screen, and I don't know, the Mandalorian is kind of an amusing show to say the least. Watching this trying to expand out on a character that was really just a once off in the old movies and even in the newer movies. More or less, in this show, though, it feels like a bunch of episodes stitched together into a format movie. So basically, a bunch of 40-minute episodes popped together. I don't remember how long every one of the episodes was of the actual TV show. They varied a lot. There was some that were just over an hour, and other ones that were just less than 40 minutes. So it's a range. But nonetheless, this movie's not too bad. It's got a range of visual shots, a range of settings, more or less. Um, Pedro Pascal is playing, of course, the main Mandalorian, and I can't figure this species. I don't know if this is supposed to be a species or what the heck their suits are supposed to represent, but they apparently represent sort of, I don't know, a brotherhood of people that wear these suits, but I don't know what the heck those suits are supposed to represent because I'm like thinking, how do they eat? How do they sleep? How do they go to the bathroom? How do they do anything? I mean, the first in Empire Strikes Back, when the bounty hunters were first introduced to us, it was just a sight gag. I mean, it was just a suit, and then they had Return of the Jedi, where they did expand on it a little bit, but more or less it's just a suit. And then they tried to break it up a little bit with the prequels, but there's been significant problems. There was significant weirdness to this film because, first of all, they're tasked with dealing with what was he trying to do? What the heck was he doing? He's there's not really a clear defined plot per se. Um, because that's the joke. It's really just Star Wars adventures. It's not really a clear defined plot. At one point, they're tasked to go after and capture somebody at some place, a strategically important person. But other than that, there's not much in this. Oh yeah, they're rescuing. They gotta go deal with the Hutts. That's what it was. They gotta go deal with the Hutts. And of course, there's the two main Hutts, and then there's a son of Jabba the Hutt who is sort of supposed to be like a wrestler in a stage match. Of course, this leads to a rather ironic scenario because this is gladiator tournaments, and of course they bring out one character that's got electrical abilities, and of course it shorts out their defense grid, which ends up releasing all these animals into the streets. So I'm not entirely sure what that was supposed to be about, but um, you know, it's Star Wars. I don't. It does suffer. It does have the advantage of having been done several years after the first after the last movie. So the visual effects have actually seen improvement over the last couple of years. Actually, it's kind of impressive. It's just how much visual effects improvements there has been. Um, because the TV show had pretty elaborate visual effects, but not quite as elaborate as this. Although it's really hard to tell because the TV show did have really good elaborate visual effects. I think that what was lacking was like there's a creature in a water area that comes out, and that's a really tough visual effect to do. There's lots of really tough visual effects to do in these movies. This movie's really expanding upon what I think I was sort of waiting for them to do one day with all these movies. Is that in a lot of older movies you have a dissection, a split shot. You have your animatronic or your puppet in a spot, and of course you have to do some clever camera work in the old days to get around the fact that they can't actually move very far. They can only do one limited action, maybe a couple, maybe you got a couple puppets you can move around on the ground, but more or less the movements are kind of limited. The Phantom Menace tried to expand this out a little bit by giving full range movement to CGI characters. The problem with the prequels though um, is that George Lucas was not very good at direction of his movies, so everything ends up kind of awkward. I think honestly there was better movies made at the time that did a better job of this. Like even Lord of the Rings did a better job of displaying 3D animated characters. Nonetheless, Mandalorian Grogu is just the latest example of them spending a bit of money to try and put 3D animated characters into a live action scene. And of course, it ends up with some very spectacular shots of involving AT-AT walkers, X-wings, and stuff like that. Of course, you got little creatures that Mandalorian has to deal with, and he actually that's probably the hardest visual effects shot they had to do was showing the little ones, both the Yoda character and also the other creatures that they had. These guys are like mechanics of some sort, mechanical genius, and they are little tiny creatures. I am assuming it took a lot of effort to actually animate them to get them look proper. In fact, I think there's a lot of movies just showing like I think that was the other thing too is that the new Star Wars movies and these movies all are all a combination of what George Lucas was originally envisioning in his old movies was the full fluid movement of puppetry. Now it's not puppets, it's CGI shots. And I think at the time he thought he might do it with puppetry, but of course he was finding out how limited it was with puppetry. But nonetheless, there's some pretty interesting stuff in this movie. More or less, the Mandalorian ends up on a planet with a lot of forestry because that's where the Hutts happen to live. And again, this seems like a bunch of stitched together episodes almost because there seems like a lot of disconnected stuff here that goes on. And a lot of it involves the fact that basically the Mandalorian gets stuck on this planet for a little bit because when he was fighting this creature in the water, he ends up getting hit, and of course there's a venom of sorts in the creature's saliva, I think. And nonetheless, he spends a good amount of time in the forest, and a lot of interesting creatures are met, including one that seems like I'm not sure what he was supposed to be. Actually, remembering it's almost like a descendant, one of the other creatures. Like if you remember the Phantom Menace, the speed racers, the pod racers, and you could remember the one guy that was supposed to win all the races. There's a creature in this movie that's sort of reminiscent of that guy. Now I don't remember what his name was. It doesn't really matter. It's just the fact that it does seem like he's reminiscent of that. Nonetheless, we get a lot of good shots. The storyline is fairly straightforward. In fact, there's actually not as much storyline going on here as you would think. Fairly straightforward story narrative. It's more or less just a Mandalorian going around and getting things done. There's lots of different sequences of that. He's more or less dealing with all kinds of different scenarios. That's the one good thing about this movie is it keeps the pace going. It keeps the plot moving. It's not stale. It's not particularly boring. It managed to keep its interest in what's doing. Managed to produce some really good shots in the forests. And I guess that's all I really needed to do because this is Star Wars. Star Wars was never about deep plotting. This is all about space opera. Yeah, relatively decent movie. Probably, well, it's definitely better than Rise of Skywalker, and it's probably right on par with I don't know. It's probably better than Solo. It's probably better than Attack of the Clones. It's a fairly decent movie in terms of what it's trying to do. Nothing really terribly wrong with it. Yeah, I don't know. Grogu, to me, he's too much of an infant. He doesn't really, can't really do anything, so there's not really much he adds to the movie other than to be there and be cute. He does. He has some knowledge of the Force now, so I guess that's one thing. But I don't know. The movie is not that story heavy. Yeah, there's just lots of good scenery and good areas to fight in. And I don't know. It works out as a decent movie. I guess that's good enough. But yeah, Star Wars, Mandalorian, and Grogu.